It is estimated over 20 million people in the U.S. have some form of dry eye. Inflammation is the core component of chronic disease and is what is thought to be the cause of dry eye. In the eyelids, there are these glands called meibomian glands, and they produce oils for the tear film. If those glands get inflamed, it's called meibomian gland dysfunction, and it causes the tear film to become unstable and to dry out quicker, and people will get symptoms such as tearing toward the end of the day, or their eyes will start burning. A lot of the symptoms typically are at the end of the day.
Dry eye is really characterized as a lack of homeostasis of the tear film. There's aqueous deficient dry eye and there's evaporative dry eye.
So dry eye, you either have a problem with how tears are being produced, or you have a problem with how the tear layer is maintaining itself and staying in your eyes. The tear film plays a very important role. It's the barrier between your eye and the environment. So very important. A lot of environmental things insult our eyes. So the thicker that barrier on the front of the eye, the more resistant your eye will be to irritation. The second thing it does is focuses light. So depending on how wet or dry your eyes are, you're going to have, it's going to affect the way you see. The tear layer on the front of the eye is primarily a layer of water with a little layer of mucus on the bottom that anchors that whole mess down to the front of the eye. And then there's a little layer of oil on top that acts as a seal and keeps the water layer from evaporating out. A lot of dry eye, I want to say 80% of dry eye patients actually have what we call meibomian gland dysfunction.
The meibomian glands are the glands that secrete the good oily or lipid layer of the tears, and without those, then the quality of our tears is very poor.
When we treat dry eye, one of the primary ways to treat it is with some drops, but you've got to manage that oil layer, which is very important, and there's many ways to do that. There is no cure for dry eye. Normally what we're doing is managing and minimizing, the symptoms. So often patients will come in and think, I can just give them a drop and that's going to be the end of it, but it's really very complex in terms of management.
Many people feel there is no cure for dry eye, but now we're starting to see that if you treat the inflammation more in a holistic point of view rather than just in a drug point of view, you could actually reverse dry eye. We have to change your diet. You have to be on proper supplementation. You have to do exercise. The same things that are good for your heart, that decrease inflammation, are good for decreasing your risk of dry eye.
You avoid dry eye by practicing some very good tips. First of all is, good nutrition with high omega-3s and also good antioxidants and anti-inflammatory products. And then things to avoid, like you want to avoid smoking, you want to avoid diet high in sugar, you want to avoid white rice, white pasta, white potato, you want to avoid sodas and sugary drinks, and you want to keep your insulin levels down.
So when we talk to patients about dry eye, one of the things we talk about is nutrition. I feel omega-3 is very important for dry eye. Omega-3, it's good for your heart, it's good for your nervous system, and it's a good way to treat dry eye, but also prevent it from happening in the first place. And often just eating salmon a few times a week isn't enough.
There are a lot of foods that are rich in omega-3s, and omega-3s play a big role in helping us produce more of our own natural tears and reduce inflammation. A couple examples of those would be raw nuts, for instance, wild fish like wild salmon, anchovies, sardines, mackerel. These are good sources of omega-3. Avocado has really good source of good fat. It also has vitamin E that fights the free radicals that also lead to inflammation and can lead to dryness.
One of the things we recommend is that the patient drink 8 glasses of water a day, and medications can affect hydration. So, antihistamines, everyone's got allergies now, so it's not uncommon to have the patient on 2 or 3 different allergy medications. Drying up your sinuses, you're also drying up your eyes with those medications. So the dry eye protocol, we start with the simplest thing and then we move down. So the first thing we'll recommend to patients is drops. And depending on how it looks, I might recommend a preservative-free artificial tear drop, 3-4 times a day. I'll tell them breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime. If it's a little more severe, we might prescribe a liquid gel, for them to put in their eye in the evening. That's a drop that's initially liquid. When it gets into the eye, it becomes a little more thick. You don't want to put something like that in during the day, or it'll blur the vision, or we might even go to an ointment. We'll recommend hydration. We'll recommend again, drinking enough water, each day, and what we call blink awareness. Normal blinking is 15 times a minute. It drops to 5 times a minute when we're looking at our computer screens. Patients need to be aware of that. It's not uncommon to stare at your computer screen while you're working, and suddenly, minutes go by and you realize you're really not blinking the way, you should be. There are other treatments that we'll look at. The hot compresses, very important. Again, if it's more severe, we'll have them do a regimented course of hot compresses for a few minutes, a few times a day. If it's a little milder, we'll recommend each day in the shower for a minute or so. Just close their eyes and let some hot water run on your face to heat up those meibomian glands and keep the oil flowing. But the medications I tend to reserve for more severe cases because they can take weeks to start working. They're a big commitment from the patient. Another thing we can do is something called punctal plugs, where there are drains, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Our eyes actually drain into our nose. That's why when we cry, our nose runs. We can put little plugs in the bottom drains so that the tears remain in the eyes a little longer. Again, I kind of reserve that for a more severe case of dry eye. I would say the majority of the dry eye we see is just something that can be treated with nutrition, hot compresses, and tears as needed. When someone has dry eye, they're going to feel one or two things. They're either going to feel irritation, burning, pain. There'll be a sandy feeling like you have sand in your eyes, a foreign body sensation, we call it.
Another thing would be redness of the eyes when there's no other symptoms that exist, but they say my eyes are red all the time.
And it may be counterintuitive. There may be no pain, but the eye may actually be tearing a lot. So patients will come in and they'll say their primary symptom is my eyes are tearing a lot. And we'll discuss dry eye and they'll say, but that doesn't make any sense. How could my eye be dry when it's actually wet? But your eye has a reflex system. If it feels itself getting a little dry, it'll actually turn the water on and try to wet itself.
But these tears are not good quality tears and they end up running off. We call that epiphora or excessive tearing. And then there's the visual disturbances that come. People will complain about filmy vision or vision that fluctuates, blur or vision that comes in and out of focus. And then there are some patients that suffer from dry eye but don't have any symptoms at all. Women are 70% more likely to develop dry eye than men. Age is a big factor. The older we are, the more likely we are to develop. Diabetics are extremely at risk. 50% or more of diabetics will develop dry eye. And again, those with autoimmune diseases like Sjogren's syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, and also lupus are at high risk.
The cause of dry eye could be hormonal. People with autoimmune disease are at greater risk of dry eye because autoimmune means inflammation. So if we could treat the systemic causes of dry eye, we could decrease the symptoms of dry eye. Revamping the diet, eating real foods rather than processed foods will decrease your symptoms of dry eye. Thank you for watching Open Your Eyes. Be sure to tune in for more informative episodes.